On Christmas Eve 1975, police were called to the W.T. Zeigler Furniture store on 1010 South Dillard Street in the small town of Winter Garden, Florida. They arrived to a horrific scene. Tommy Zeigler, the store's owner, had been shot in the stomach. Inside the store were the bodies of Zeigler's wife Eunice, his in-laws Perry and Virginia Edwards, and Charlie Mays, a loyal customer of the furniture store. Their bodies were riddled with bullet wounds, and the two men had been brutally beaten. Witnesses came forward, alleging that Zeigler had been acting suspiciously on the night of the crime, and investigators discovered that he had recently taken out a life insurance policy on his wife. Zeigler was convicted of the murders, and on July 16, 1976, he was sentenced to death. Today, he remains on death row, but throughout all of this, Zeigler has maintained that he is innocent, and some independent investigators believe he was wrongfully convicted. For 20 years, Zeigler has been begging the state of Florida to conduct DNA tests, which he believes will exonerate him. In February 2023, the courts finally ruled to allow DNA testing. What happened on that night in 1975? Is Tommy Zeigler truly an innocent man, or was he responsible for the savage attack on that Christmas Eve? William T. Zeigler Jr., better known as Tommy, was born on July 25, 1945. He lived in Winter Garden, Florida, and worked at the W.T. Zeigler Furniture store, which was founded by his parents, Tom and Beulah Zeigler, in 1939. Zeigler's early life was seemingly unremarkable. As a child, he attended a military school in Jacksonville, Florida, and he graduated from Lakeview High School in 1963. His teachers and classmates remembered him as a well-behaved youth who was on the honor roll and won awards for swimming. One classmate remarked that he was spoiled rotten, and he couldn't do anything wrong as far as his mother was concerned. After high school, he attended Orlando Junior College for a year before joining the military. After 6 months of service, Zeigler returned to Winter Garden and began working in the family store. In 1967, he married Eunice Edwards, a kindergarten teacher. One source states that the couple had met while Zeigler was coaching football at a local elementary school, while another claims that they met at church. The Zeiglers were closely involved with the church and the local community, and they were hoping to have a child. They profited from the success of their family business, which had a net worth of over $1 million in the 1970s. But they did not advertise their wealth. The couple was beset by tragedy on Thanksgiving Day in 1968, when their home burned to the ground. They stayed at an apartment owned by Zeigler's family before moving to a house on 75 Temple Grove Drive. Zeigler's father suffered a stroke in 1975, leading Tommy and Eunice to take on more responsibilities at the company. Afterwards, Zeigler took out loans to build a swimming pool and purchase a luxury car. According to his friends and neighbors, Zeigler became focused on the business and on renovating his home to the point of obsession, often refusing invitations to social events. The adult Zeigler was described as a thin and physically unassuming man, weighing only 155 pounds at a height of 6'1". He had poor eyesight that required him to wear thick glasses. However, he was reportedly quite strong from years of moving heavy furniture. He practiced shooting as a hobby and owned a large collection of guns and rifles, some of which he kept in the furniture store, claiming that he needed them for protection against robbers. His other hobbies included breeding and showing cats, which he did with his wife. According to his acquaintances, Zeigler had an explosive temper at times. However, they did not believe that he was capable of the attack that was yet to come. On the morning of Christmas Eve 1975, Zeigler was working at the furniture store when Charlie and Maddie Mays stopped by to purchase new flooring for their home. The Mayses were an African-American couple who worked in the agriculture industry in Orange County, and they were well acquainted with the Zeiglers. Allegedly, after Maddie had picked out the flooring, Zeigler took Charlie to the back of the store and showed him a TV, which he offered to sell him at a discount. They made a deal and arranged for Charlie to pick up the TV at 7:30 p.m. Afterwards, Maddie claimed that Zeigler told her, "You will have the surprise of your life." In the afternoon, Edward Williams, an African-American man who was a close friend of the Zeigler family and a part-time employee at the furniture store, visited Zeigler. Zeigler requested that Williams meet up with him around 7:30 to help with the TV sale. They arranged to meet at Zeigler's house and drive to the store. Eunice's parents, Perry and Virginia Edwards, were in town for the holidays, and the three planned to go to the furniture store around the same time to pick out a new armchair. Afterwards, Eunice and Tommy had plans to attend a dinner party hosted by Ted Vandevenner, a prominent attorney and judge. Don Fick, the Winter Garden police chief, would be in attendance. Edward Williams reported that when he arrived that evening, Zeigler wasn't there. The garage door was open, and Zeigler's car was gone. He had left a note saying that he would be back soon, and Edward decided to wait for him at the house. Around 7:30 p.m., people in the area reported hearing a series of loud noises coming from the direction of the furniture store. They believed that someone must have been setting off firecrackers to celebrate the holiday. When 8 p.m. had passed and Tommy and Eunice had not arrived at the dinner party, Police Chief Fick began to grow concerned. He and his wife drove around town looking for the Zeiglers, but had no luck. After about 45 minutes, they returned to the party. They passed by the furniture store, which appeared to be closed. 2 police cars were parked at a KFC across the street. One of them belonged to Oakland Police Chief Robert J. Thompson, who was having a meal while on break. Thompson decided to attend Vandevenner's party after work, arriving around 9:15. As he walked in the door, he was confronted by Fick, who frantically explained that something had gone very wrong at the furniture store. The party attendants had just received a call from Zeigler, who claimed that he had been shot and needed help. Fick and Thompson drove to the furniture store and arranged for more officers to be dispatched to the location. They arrived to a shocking scene. Zeigler had suffered a gunshot wound to his abdomen and was covered in blood. He was struggling to open the front door of the store. He was quickly transported to West Orange Memorial Hospital by Thompson, where he underwent emergency surgery. On the way to the hospital, Zeigler told Thompson that he'd been shot by Charlie Mays. When asked if Mays had tried to rob him, Zeigler responded, "I think so." He stated that he shot back at Charlie in self-defense. Zeigler, suffering from his injuries, then became incoherent, repeating something about Don's plant at the store. After Zeigler was brought to the hospital, the officers entered the store for the first time. They were appalled by the horrific scene. Blood was everywhere. 3 bodies lay on the floor, 2 men and 1 young woman. Officers on scene recognized one of the bodies as Charlie Mays, but were unable to immediately identify the other victims. A 4th body was found later that night. Police Chief Fick contacted the Orange County Sheriff's Office and passed the case on to them. Donald Fry would become the lead investigator. Meanwhile, Beulah Zeigler had just received the news that her son had been shot. At this time, Eunice's whereabouts were still unknown, and before Zeigler was taken into the operating room, Beulah asked him if he knew what happened to Eunice. He replied, "Isn't she with you?" Thompson contacted an employee of the furniture store and brought him to the scene. The employee identified the bodies as Perry and Virginia Edwards and Eunice Zeigler. Edward Williams was the first witness to provide investigators with testimony, and he reported the following. Around midnight on the day of the murders, he recounted to a detective how he had arrived at Zeigler's home at 7:28 p.m. Zeigler arrived back at the house 15 minutes later, accompanied by 2 passengers. He entered the home, told Williams he would be back in a few minutes, and he drove off again. After about 30 more minutes, Zeigler returned alone. He wiped his vehicle down with a wet cloth before getting in Williams' truck. Williams claimed that he saw a stain on Zeigler's pants that resembled blood. Zeigler allegedly instructed Williams to drive him to the furniture store. They arrived around 8:40 p.m., and Zeigler beckoned Williams into the store. When he entered, Zeigler pulled a gun on him. He pulled the trigger several times, but the gun did not fire. This weapon would later be connected to 2 of the bodies in the store, and detectives theorized that Zeigler forgot to reload the weapon. He gave the gun to Williams, who escaped with it in his right pants pocket. Williams ran to the KFC across the street and attempted to phone the police, but the caller informed him there ain't no police here. Williams then fled to Orlando. In the early hours of Christmas Day, another witness came forward. Felton Thomas, a young African-American man, claimed that he had accompanied Charlie Mays to the furniture store to pick up the TV that night. The 2 men met Zeigler, who drove them to an orange grove where he gave them guns and instructed them to fire out the car window. They returned to the store after to retrieve the TV. Zeigler claimed to have forgotten the keys, so he hopped a fence at the back of the building and tried to break a window with a nearby pipe. When he couldn't break into the building, Zeigler drove back to his house with the 2 passengers to retrieve the key. This corresponds with what Edward Williams claimed to have seen while waiting for Zeigler at the house. Zeigler returned with a box of ammo and told the passengers to reload their guns. When they returned to the store, Thomas said he was uncomfortable and refused to go inside. Around midnight, he learned that Mays had been killed. On Christmas Day, the medical examiner performed autopsies on the 4 victims and established their identities. Perry and Virginia Edwards and Charlie Mays had suffered multiple gunshot wounds, while Eunice Zeigler had been killed by a single shot to the back of the head. The 2 men had also been severely beaten with a blunt object. The examiner determined that the deaths had occurred between 7 and 9 p.m. By this time, lead investigator Fry believed he had a clear picture of what had transpired at the furniture store. Orange County in the 1970s was a hotbed of racial tension. Race relations were uneasy, and many officials were rumored to have links to racist organizations. Fry believed that Zeigler committed the murders and tried to frame the black men, knowing that police would believe his word over theirs. He had brought Thomas and Mays to the orange grove to get their fingerprints on the gun and gunshot residue on their hands. Fry believed Zeigler had shot himself in the stomach to appear as a victim of the crime. The only thing he didn't understand was what could have motivated Zeigler. On December 26th, Fry set out to interview Zeigler, who was recovering from his wounds in the hospital. He did not get permission to speak with him directly, but Zeigler's lawyer, Ralph Terry Hadley III, spoke to officials on his behalf. Hadley stated that Eunice, Perry, and Virginia went to the store to pick out an armchair, while Tommy stayed at home waiting for Edward Williams. They had planned to meet at 7 p.m., and Williams was late. He decided to go to the liquor store to pick up booze for the party, and he left a note telling Williams he'd be back soon. He drove away in a furniture store employee's car. However, he changed his mind about going to the liquor store and returned to the house. This time, Williams was there and they drove to the furniture store in his truck. As Zeigler entered the store, he was attacked by at least 2 men. He could not see clearly as it was dark, and he didn't have his glasses. He remembered attempting to fire 2 guns, but he wasn't sure how many shots were actually fired. He first tried to fire the .22 automatic that he carried at his side, but it jammed, and he threw it at his attackers instead. He then took a .357 Colt out of a drawer in the furniture store and may have fired some shots before being shot himself and losing consciousness. When he came to, the attackers were gone. Zeigler had been trying to combat loan sharking groups, and Hadley proposed that the killings had been orchestrated in retribution for this. The examination of the crime scene uncovered several intriguing pieces of information. A bullet had been fired into a wall clock, freezing it at 7:24 p.m. 5 different guns were recovered from the scene. Notably, Zeigler's glasses and keys were found on the floor near Charlie Mays' body, along with a tooth belonging to Mays. In Mays' pockets were cash and receipts totaling $415. Strangely, Mays' pants had been pulled down and there was blood on his underwear. Fry, who had experience in blood spatter examination, found a series of bloody smears on the floor that he believed were from Perry Edwards. Edwards' body was found at the end of the blood trail, near the back of the showroom. Blood droplets from Mays were scattered on top of the smears, which Fry surmised had dried by that time. This meant that Edwards must have been killed at least 15 minutes before Mays, casting doubt on Zeigler's reported sequence of events. Furthermore, a shoulder holster was found in a pool of Mays' blood, but the holster itself had no blood on it, leading Fry to believe the killer had placed it there after Mays' death. Virginia Edwards' body was discovered in front of a floral couch in the showroom, while Eunice Zeigler's body was found in the kitchen, shot in the back of the head. She had died in a strangely relaxed pose, with a hand in her pocket, suggesting that she had been taken by surprise and she had been the first to die. In Zeigler's desk, Fry discovered paperwork for life insurance policies that he had applied for in October 1975, which netted him over $500,000 from his wife's death. The gun that Williams claimed Zeigler had given him, a .38 caliber revolver, was recovered from Williams' car. Evidence was sent to an FBI laboratory for further analysis, but investigators felt that they already had enough to identify Zeigler as the killer. On December 29th, while he was still in the hospital, Zeigler was arrested and charged with murder, and his preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 16th. Felton and Williams gave their accounts, and lead investigator Fry provided his interpretation of the crime scene evidence. However, the results from the FBI lab were still being developed, and without them, he could not prove the spatters on the floor were even blood. Fry also mentioned the insurance policies, but admitted that Zeigler and his family seemed to be in a comfortable financial position and would not have needed the money. The judge felt that the evidence was lacking and decided to make Zeigler eligible for bond. Zeigler was released from jail on January 19th with a $40,000 bail. The furniture store reopened that day, but Zeigler was no longer working there. On January 20th, investigators made a breakthrough in the case. They traced two of the guns, cheap, low-quality .38 revolvers, to a man named Frank Smith, who had purchased them from a pawn shop last year. Smith was friends with Edward Williams and stated that Zeigler had expressed interest in acquiring untraceable weapons. Smith said that he bought the guns and Williams delivered them to Zeigler. Williams supported this testimony, as did Smith's mother-in-law, who also claimed that Zeigler had asked her about acquiring guns illegally. By February 1975, the results were back from the FBI lab. Blood typing had failed on many specimens. However, an unexpected finding was made. Tommy Zeigler had type O blood, but the blood found on his clothing was mainly type A, which was the same type as Perry Edwards, Charlie Mays, and Eunice Zeigler. The shots that had killed Perry and Virginia Edwards came from the .38 revolver that was found in Edward Williams' car. The guns had largely been wiped clean. No fingerprints could be definitively identified. According to an FBI analyst, there were some partial fingerprints on a .357 Magnum recovered from the scene, but they were not clear enough to be used for identification. Zeigler's lawyer conducted his own examination of the evidence and found several discrepancies. Eunice Zeigler's coat showed stains that implied it had been handled by someone who was bleeding or covered in blood. This cast doubt on the theory that Zeigler took her by surprise and that her body had not been disturbed. He noted a pair of broken eyeglasses belonging to Perry Edwards, which were matched to glass shards found in a patch of blood near the front of the store. This contradicted Fry's theories about where Perry was killed. In the photographs of Charlie May's body, he noticed a curious detail: a human tooth lying on the sleeve of his sweatshirt. Mays had lost a tooth during his fatal beating and had been recovered from the crime scene. This other tooth was unaccounted for. Could it have belonged to an unknown intruder? Lastly, a spent .22 cartridge was found at the back of the store. The cartridge matched the gun that Zeigler carried and that he claimed to have used to defend himself. But the corresponding bullet could not be found at the scene, and none of the victims had been shot with a .22. The only way this could make sense was if Zeigler had shot an unknown sixth person who made it out of the store alive. Zeigler's lawyer thought back to an account given by a witness named Nathaniel Brown. Shortly after Zeigler's arrest, Brown got in contact with investigators and told them that the murders were carried out by a white man and 3 black men, Charlie Mays and 2 others named Don and Jerry. Jerry had been shot at the scene but managed to escape. Brown also mentioned that the guns had been wiped clean, which was not known to police at the time. Investigators dismissed him as a scammer who was pursuing a cash reward. When the defense team tried to contact him again, he could not be located. The FBI stated that the footprints believed to belong to the perpetrator could not have been made by Zeigler's shoes. Once again, the evidence pointed towards an unknown actor. Zeigler appeared in front of a grand jury on March 25, 1976. Lead investigator Fry's testimony was the most damning. He matched bloody footprints in the vicinity of the bodies to the shoes that Zeigler was wearing. He argued that having served as a medic in the army, Zeigler would have had the medical knowledge to shoot himself without threatening his life, although this claim was challenged by a medical examiner who stated that the wound was in a dangerous location. Fry recounted salacious rumors uncovered while interviewing Winter Garden residents. According to Fry, Zeigler had a strained relationship with his wife and mother. He may have been secretly gay, lending a sexual motive to the murders, and he allegedly engaged in disturbing behavior as a child, such as vandalism and animal abuse. He even claimed that Zeigler once tried to drown his father. These arguments were apparently convincing, and on March 26th, Zeigler was indicted for the murders and returned to jail. The trial opened on June 8, 1976. It would drag on for several weeks, with over 100 witnesses testifying. The bloody footprints were a major point of evidence. While an FBI analyst stated that the footprint near Perry Edwards' body could not have been left by Zeigler, another expert argued the opposite. The prosecution contended that the type A blood found on the underarm of Zeigler's shirt must have come from Perry Edwards. The testimony of Edward Williams and Felton Thomas again played a critical role in the trial. Zeigler's lawyer attempted to discredit Thomas by having him describe the route they took to the furniture store, and the route he described would have required that they drive through a concrete wall. One of the witnesses for the defense was Madeline Nolan, who cast doubt on Williams' sequence of events. She stated that a black man fitting Williams' description had asked to use the phone at the KFC after Zeigler had been rescued from the furniture store shooting. Beulah Zeigler testified that more than $1,000 in cash had gone missing from the store, supporting the theory of a robbery. A psychiatrist who had examined Zeigler stated such a crime could only have been committed by a psychopath, yet Zeigler showed no evidence of suffering from any mental disorder. The defense's final witness was Zeigler himself. Among other matters, he addressed the issue of the insurance policies. He said that he had been motivated to obtain life insurance for himself and his wife after his father's stroke. On the first vote, the jury was undecided. 6 thought Zeigler was guilty, but the other half were unsure. After several days of deliberation, another vote was held. By this time, support for Zeigler had waned. He was found guilty of the 4 murders, and the jury recommended that he be sentenced to life in prison. However, the judge overruled them and sentenced Zeigler to death. Writers who have examined the case raised issues with the trial and suggested bias on the part of the judge and investigators. The judge who sentenced Zeigler to death had previously been involved in a court case with Zeigler and his lawyer, in which Zeigler's lawyer was defending a bar owner who had lost his liquor license for allegedly selling marijuana. Zeigler had testified in this case, while the judge was on the opposing side. Ultimately, Zeigler's lawyer won this case. However, the judge had refused to recuse himself from Zeigler's trial. Other researchers believe that Irma Brickell, a juror in Zeigler's trial, was intimidated into voting guilty. Brickell was the last juror who believed Zeigler was innocent. During the trial, other jurors were shouting at her and calling her names. She began to feel unwell and fainted, after which the judge had her doctor supply her with Valium. According to one of the jurors, when she returned, she was clearly under the influence of something. At one point, she asked a question about how Eunice Zeigler died. Another juror responded by picking up an empty gun, placing it against her head, and pulling the trigger. She changed her mind and voted guilty. According to the Metal Justice Project, the judge's decision to overrule the jury and sentence Zeigler to death would be considered unconstitutional today. Tommy Zeigler remains on death row, and he continues to maintain his innocence. He has made several failed attempts to appeal his sentencing, and narrowly escaped execution twice in the 1980s. In 1988, he managed to have his death sentence vacated. However, he was resentenced to death 1 year later. At his resentencing hearing, he admitted that he had plotted to bribe another inmate to falsely confess to the murders. He stated that he did it because he knew he was innocent and felt like he had no other chance. Zeigler isn't the only one who maintains that he is innocent. His lawyer, Terry Hadley, believes Zeigler's version of events, and he has refused to take on any other criminal cases since. Philip Finch, the author of a comprehensive 1992 book on the case, claims that there is no way that Zeigler could have committed the murders. Finch believes that the crime scene investigation and forensic testing was botched, and that Fry's inferences about blood spatter at the crime scene were wrong. In particular, he points out that the blood trail Fry claimed to be from Zeigler was the wrong blood type, and that an officer on scene testified that the holster found in a pool of blood had been moved during the investigation. He argues that the claimed sequence of events is so unlikely as to be impossible. Zeigler would have to have been a criminal mastermind to pull off this convoluted murder plot. Yet, one would also have to believe that he was stupid enough to tell 3 different people about his plans to acquire untraceable guns. According to the timeline given by the prosecutors, the whole plan would have fallen apart if Charlie Mays showed up any earlier than 7:30, as he would have witnessed the murders of Eunice Zeigler and Perry Edwards. Furthermore, it defies belief that Zeigler would allow Edward Williams and Felton Thomas to escape unscathed after witnessing the crime scene. He notes the large amount of blood found on Mays' shoes and pant legs, and the lack of corresponding blood stains on the floor, theorizing that Mays may have stepped in blood at some point and taken his bloody shoes off in order to cover his tracks. Finch also questions the motive, stating that Zeigler was well off financially and had no need for insurance money. He refers to the testimony of Barbara Tinsley, who recounted hearing shots coming from the furniture store between 7:35 and 7:45. Yet according to the prosecution, Zeigler would have been in the car with Mays and Thomas at the time. He also focuses on the testimony of Madeline Nolan. Based on her account of when Williams entered the restaurant, Zeigler would have already been shot by the time that Williams claimed he had tried to kill him. According to Finch, if the Nolans saw what they swore to have seen, then Tommy Zeigler was wrongfully convicted. A report from the Medill Justice Project at Northwestern University uncovered a report of witnesses Ken and Linda Roach, which had not been available at the time of the trial. They drove past the furniture store around 7:20 p.m. on Christmas Eve when they heard at least 12 to 15 shots in a time span of 4 seconds. According to forensic experts, it would be impossible for a single person to fire that many shots during that time frame using a non-automatic weapon. This supports the theory that there were multiple shooters. The report also notes that the tests found gunshot residue on Virginia Edwards' hands, indicating that she had fired a weapon, and test results released after Zeigler's trial found that Edward Williams had not carried the gun in his pants pocket as he claimed. In recent years, private investigator Lynn Marie Carty has campaigned for Zeigler's cause. She discovered a piece of evidence that detectives had previously overlooked. Early news reports and Fry's original notes mentioned a man named Robert Foster, who claimed to have met Charlie Mays before he was killed. Another witness stated that Robert Foster was a friend of Charlie Mays, who played on the same baseball team. Fry later claimed that Robert Foster was a typographical error, and the name was meant to read Felton Thomas. Carty, however, uncovered a man named Robert Foster who fit the description and had reportedly played sports with Charlie Mays. Carty learned that on Christmas Eve, there had been an attempted robbery across the street from the furniture store, and Robert Foster bore a strong resemblance to the witness's description of the robber. When Carty reached out to Foster for an interview, he denied knowing anything about Mays or Zeigler. A website titled Tommy Zeigler is Innocent shared a theory that Carty and Zeigler hold, a theory that Perry Edwards Jr. orchestrated the murders. They claimed that he was an abusive and violent man, and that his motive for committing murder was greed, revenge, and jealousy toward his respected, hard-working brother-in-law, Tommy Zeigler. On Christmas Eve, Perry Edwards Jr. knew his parents would have their new will and planned to ask Tommy to be their executor. They would be giving the farm to their daughter Eunice. This meant that on Christmas Eve, Perry Edwards Jr. was only hours away from losing his inheritance. Zeigler believes DNA evidence will exonerate him, and he has repeatedly petitioned the courts to allow retesting of the samples using techniques that were not available in the 1970s. These requests have largely been denied, as the state argues that the results are unlikely to affect the outcome of the case. Zeigler succeeded in having DNA testing performed on 4 samples from his shirt and pants. No traces of Perry Edwards' blood were found, but prosecutors argued that this did not prove his innocence, as the DNA may have degraded or the blood may have been located in other areas. Recently, Orange County Chief Prosecutor Monique Worrell has been fighting for Zeigler's right to DNA testing. A breakthrough was made in February 2023 when an appeal blocking Zeigler's access to testing was dismissed. In the coming months, this new evidence may shed light on what really happened at the furniture store that Christmas Eve. Was an innocent man really condemned to death? Did Zeigler's longtime friends, Charlie Mays and Edward Williams, inexplicably decide to orchestrate a brutal mass murder at his furniture store? Were Felton Thomas, Frank Smith, and all the other witnesses for the prosecution simply liars? Or did Zeigler create an elaborate plan to frame others for his horrific crimes?